So I'm Fran Longstaff. I'm head of psychology at Fika, which is a mental fitness platform. Yeah, I think when we sort of think about this question in the first instance, it's important to first make that distinction about whether we're talking about whether we're trying to spot signs of mental illness or we're actually trying to spot signs of poor mental health. So in the early 2000s, there was quite a lot of work that really identified that distinction. So there's almost a continuum of mental illness, and you can be high and low in that. And there's then a separate continuum of mental health, and you can be high and low in that. And it's absolutely possible to have a mental illness, but actually have good mental health. So that's a really interesting distinction. I think if we think about the mental health continuum, this is probably the forgotten continuum, really, because often when people talk about mental health, what they're really talking about is illness. But somebody with poor mental health who doesn't necessarily meet the diagnostic criteria for an illness is what we would call being in a state of languishing. So this person might be maybe a little bit low on motivation, they're not experiencing that full daily quota of positive emotions, maybe they're a bit directionless, and even pre-pandemic, there was some research that identified that as many as 12% of us are actually in that state. And that state's definitely a risk factor in time for the development of, sliding into a more severe mental illness. So yeah, that's the sort of languishing end of the mental health continuum. Yeah, I mean, we can think about the current situation that we're in. So even before we started talking just now, we were discussing, the adaptation to working from home, and I think a lot of us were really enthused by that at the beginning. But definitely, the sort of act of working from home can breed some quite bad sort of habits when it comes to our mental health. So the first probably is not being able to time box your work life well enough and separate that from your home life. So pre-pandemic, if you were going into the office, you were able to time box that day much better. What we're finding is that in the pandemic, people have been working longer hours and later. So it's really easy, isn't it, for us to hear that ping of the phone or the laptop and answer that just before we go to bed, and then we get all that bright light from the screen, and that suppresses melatonin, so we don't sleep very well. So being unable to time box our life is probably a bad one. The other one is sedentary behaviours, so physical activity. I think there was a little spike at the beginning of the pandemic, wasn't it, where everybody bought gym kit and was like, yeah, I'm going to go running. And then what we found is that typically patterns of physical activity have gone down. And that's really bad for our mental health. Because physical activity has many benefits. It releases those feel-good endorphins, it improves our body image, it improves our social connections, our sense of achievement, etc. So being sedentary is a real risk factor for poor mental health and physical health as well. So that's a bad habit. I think probably another one might be not taking breaks. That's a really important one. So we know that the typical in a typical meeting we start to lose attention at about 13-14 minutes, but how many of us during this time are sort of ploughing through bits of work? That really affects our focus. It leaves us quite drained. And I think probably the biggest bad habit that we fall into when it comes to work and mental health is thinking that our happiness will come with achievement and more money. And actually, what we need to work on is the happiness first, because that's the predictor of achievement and money. So it's actually a relationship that works the other way around. So that's a really important one. Often technology gets a really bad rap, doesn't it, when it comes to mental health? But actually, if you think about the pandemic, technology has probably been such a key player in keeping us connected and those things. I think technology, look, it's got this history of sort of a bad reputation, but in the pandemic, I think we really realised how valuable and useful it can be. And also during that pandemic, we've started to understand that we need to have breaks from it as well. But in terms of mental health, I mean, what can I say about the benefits of technology? Well, scale, accessibility, you have knowledge at your fingertips. We know that one of the strongest predictors of our mental health is mental health literacy. So how much you know about it, that's at your fingertips with technology. And certainly, you know, at Fika, we have mental fitness courses, and the exercises within those courses are all 5 minutes, because we want people in, we want them to do their exercise, and then we want them out the app. And I think that's really important, and a lot of apps are now doing that as well. So time boxing people to an activity so that they're not then getting into the, you know, aimless scrolling, etc. So it's going to be huge if you think about coming out of the pandemic. A lot of people are quite anxious about socialising again. There's going to be knowledge at the fingertips to help people cope with the new challenges that they're going to be facing. Yeah, I think the big one is, you know, I talked about it earlier, but our language that we associate with mental health at the moment. If I said to you, what are the first words that you think of when you think of mental health, you would probably say things like anxiety and depression, because culturally we have associated mental health with illness and reactivity. I think if we want to get people to a point where they are proactively working on their mental health, the starting point is to change that language. So we talk about mental fitness because it's analogous with physical fitness. You know, you wouldn't wait. Firstly, you would never do a marathon with no training, would you? You would say, if somebody said they were going to do that, you'd say, that's absolutely the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life. We should have that same attitude for our mental challenges. You know, we should be proactive and we should plan and prepare for them mentally. And we just don't have that in our culture. So if we really want to promote mental health nationally, we need to change language, and then we need to educate. I mean, education's the greatest tool, isn't it, to reach a full population. So yeah, language and education.